Year 6. Getting ready for chapter 10 now. Oh, got my copy of Wildlife. Oh, there you are, Pussykins. I was looking for you because I was going to read to you. Oh, this is Miso. My Pussykins. Are you okay? Yeah? Say hello to Year 6. There they are. Should we read them chapter 10? Yeah? Should we read chapter 10 together? Maybe you'll come and sit on my lap in a minute. I'll put you down for a minute. Gosh, all the distractions. We will get to chapter 10 in a minute, I promise. First, we're going to have a look at this, which talks about snow chickens. Now, this talks about how ptarmigans have adapted to the cold climates, which links into what we're learning about in science. Right in the way. It says that they have special characteristics that make it possible to them to survive in the incredibly cold winters. They don't lose much body heat because they're because they're covered in insulating feathers, even over their legs and feet. And they dig little holes at night, or even a small cave, to bury themselves in the snow, which keeps them sheltered. Absolutely amazing. Okay, well, I'll take a little photograph of that and put it in our... Oh God, I'm so distracted. Look, let's see what the poster is for this time. Oh, cute. It's a red squirrel. Red squirrels sleep in a messy ball of leafy twigs called a dray. Miss Fletcher, a dray. You were asking where do squirrels sleep? It's called a dray. They fill it with soft material like moss and feathers to make it cosy. Sometimes they share it with other squirrels. You can see 2 tails in this photo. Can you now? Indeed. See if you can spot the 2 tails. I've completely digressed. Children of Winter, chapter 10. I'll sit over here next to my lovely plant that Miss Price gave me. Another mouth to feed. All the time Clem was talking, Dan was trying to get Catherine's attention. He took the slate from her and began to draw, as she had done, and when he had finished, he handed it to her, almost too excited to speak. See, Kath, I know what we can do. She looked at his drawing of the barn, not understanding. See? Impatiently he drew some figures. 3 stick figures in the barn, 1 stick animal, 2 stick birds, and round the back of the barn, where he had sketched in the pen, a stick man lying down. There! Dan! She thrust the slate to Tessa. The sheet pen, of course, was ideal. Part of it they had already covered with logs and sacking to keep the wood from the fire dry. They would bring the wood into the barn and Cloudy and the hens. We'll make a stable of the barn and never mind the smell, said Catherine, and we can light a small fire in the pen where there's no cover to keep him warm and to keep the animals away, and he can have my sack. They ran about their task, carrying in huge armloads of wood, which they piled up by the thinking log. Then they led in Cloudy, who immediately began to eat the straw in the barn. The hens clucked busily after her, pecking up the grains that were lying around the corn bins, and then fluttered up onto the straw pile and found themselves at hollows. Catherine did what she could to clean out the pen, while Dan and Tessa brought out straw for Clem to lie on, and another sack. While they were doing this, Clem sat huddled up against the barn wall with Catherine's blanket round him, and when it was all prepared, he half walked, half crawled round the back and into the pen. He snuggled himself thankfully into the straw and drew the second rug round himself. Tessa filled his bowl again from another bowl and put it just within his reach. There could be no water for him. The trickle stream was still frozen. Tomorrow they would follow it down to where it was wider and maybe thawed. Catherine hovered anxiously just outside the pen. "I'm right sorry, Clem. It looks as if we've pinched that shelter." He didn't answer. "We've done the best we can for thee." Clem coughed into the straw. It seemed to rack his body. He drew the rugs back around himself and lay back again. "'Tis good. I thank thee for this." And then he seemed to sleep. Dan had the idea of dragging the remains of the fire round to the mouth of the pen. It would bring a little warmth, though it would hardly last the night out. They were careful to place it where the smoke wouldn't annoy Clem and where sparks wouldn't land on straw. They'd learned to take this sort of care during the last few weeks. They could see now by the glow from the fire that Clem wasn't asleep, but lay watching them, too weary to move or speak. And they were weary themselves. They hadn't worked as hard or as fast at this since they first moved up to the barn. Satisfied then that they had done as much as they could for Clem that night, they gave him their good night blessings and left him to try to sleep. "I pray that it restores him," said Tessa. "Let's go to sleep ourselves now before Cloudy eats up all our beds of straw." Right, doing my classic, checking it's still recording. Let's have a look. Yep, all good, excellent. It was good to wake up the next morning and hear the hens fussing about in the straw by their heads. Cloudy lowed across to the children as though welcoming their morning chatter. Poor Dan had the job of cleaning out the space where she had spent the night and laying a sprinkling of fresh straw down for her while Tessa led her out to milk her. Not that she gave much that was worth having just now. They had decided that what she did yield would be given to Clem, if he could manage it. Catherine ran round to peep in at him. He was awake and lying in much the same position as he'd been in when they'd left him the night before. He told her that he was much rested. He managed to push out his bowl, and Catherine drew it towards her with a stick and ladled snow in it to clean it out. She built another fire away from the pen to boil the gruel, and she poured some of Cloudy's sweet, warm milk into that and pushed it back towards Clem. Clem managed to swallow a little of it. Then she burnt the stick. Day by day, Clem seemed to grow a little stronger, though from time to time his fever came back and left him pale and exhausted. He talked to them when he was well, and he referred again and again to the day he had last seen his sister down in their village. "I shouldn't have left her," he said bitterly. "What if she's alone now and in need of nursing?" "Well, that couldn't have nursed her anyway," Tessa reminded him from her perch on the sitting stone. "That can't even stand upright, let alone do any nursing." "When I'm better," he said, "I'll go back down and see her." That thought would comfort him a little, and he'd doze away for a time, and then, when the sunlight fell across his face, he would stir from his sleep, remembering a task that was to be done. "Has the year turned yet?" he would ask. They felt it had. The days were longer, it seemed, and the sun was not so pale. But surely, if the spring had come, then all the snows on the moors would be gone. The trickle stream wouldn't be frozen first thing. On days like this, Clem would come staggering out to the mouth of his pen, shielding his eyes against the day's brightness. "I must get up to my sheep. What have they done for their winter feeding? They'll be lambing soon, and then what?" Tessa, alarmed, would shout for Catherine to come, and Clem would flop to his knees and faint, and it would be all he could do to drag himself back into his bed again. "And stay there and all," Tessa would say to him in her mother's voice. "We'll have none of this capering." In her heart, Tessa worried about Clem. He seemed to make progress. He ate a little each day, but he was listless and weak still. "Dost think Clem's better yet?" she asked Catherine one morning. They were lying wrapped in their blankets and could tell by the way their breath hung in the air that it was far too cold to get up yet. "I can't tell. Maybe he'll know when he's better and just go." "Ah, I don't want him to go," said Dan. "He changes so quickly," said Tessa. "Sometimes he's in such a fury with himself that I think the pen will fall apart with his twisting. And then sometimes he lies so quiet and still that I can't tell whether he's awake or asleep or—" "He isn't strong enough to feed himself," said Catherine quickly. "He needs someone to lift the bowl to his lips for him. But most of all, he's lonely. Sometimes I feel I would just like to sit by him and talk and hold his hand." "What for?" asked Dan. "For comfort," said Tessa, "but I daren't." "Comfort," said Catherine. "That's the one thing we cannot give him." Dan was the first up next morning. He came back into the barn soon after daylight and knelt by the two girls, flicking water in their faces from a little bowl he was holding. "Goblin!" shrieked Catherine. "Little toad, stop it!" "But see what it is." He held out the bowl to her. "I see what it is, all right. 'Tis waterfall, and cold water at that. It bites as though it has teeth in it. 'Tis that cold." Oh, I love that description. "I got it from the trickle stream." "Thou never did. 'Tis frozen solid," said Tessa. "'Tis thawed, Tess. Look, the ice is all gone." Dan ran back to the door and pulled it open. Sunlight like gold blazed through, so they could see dust motes dancing in it. They could hear from behind the barn the rapid splash of water from the trickle stream, and that was a sound that they'd long forgotten about. "We must take Clem some fresh water," said Catherine. "I took him some already. He said 'twas better than ale and sweeter." Tessa led Cloudy out and tethered her to a tree. The two hens, long ago nicknamed Dame Cluck and Mistress Feathers, squawked after her. "We'll expect good milk from thee now," she said, "and an egg or two from thy friends." Later that morning, the two girls decided to go up to the trap. Maybe the sunshine had brought the beasts out from their winter holes and there'd be a rabbit caught in there for them. There was not. "No matter," said Catherine. "There's still some salt beef left." And they both laughed because they'd grown to hate the stuff. They wandered further down into the woods, not noticing till they came out again into a clearing that the sky was clouding over and that the sunlight had gone. "It may rain before we get back," Catherine said, "and I thought spring was come." "It has," said Tessa. "Look under the trees." Thrusting up through the thickness of grass and roots, they found snowdrops. Lovely. They made the girls feel as though winter was lifting itself off the earth. "Let's take some back," Tessa said, "and thread them in the straw to make the barn look nice." "We will look well in our lovely house," laughed Catherine. "Flowers in it and a cow." "No doubt the cow will eat the flowers and all, as a change from eating up our bed. Shall we go back now, Kath? The sun's gone." But Catherine wanted to go further on down into the woods. It was the first time they'd wandered far from the barn since the snow came. It was good to get away for a time, and from their worries about Clem. Strangely, she felt that things were getting better now, but maybe it was the glimpse of sunshine and the show of snowdrops that made her feel that way. "Let's walk a bit further," she said, "just to enjoy the day. Dan will be all right." Oh dear, I'm nervous for Dan. Dan was on the sitting stone outside the barn, drawing on his slate. He was aware of sounds coming from the pen, but ignored them at first, thinking that Clem was cleaning out his bed area to make himself more comfortable, as he sometimes did now. Then he heard Clem groan. He ran to the pen and peered in. Clem was lying in the straw, twisting and thrashing about in it in what seemed to be an agony. Again and again he raised his head up, only to let it drop back into the straw. Dan watched him in horror. He had never seen Clem in this state before. "Clem, are thou badly? What can I fetch thee?" But Clem didn't answer. For that matter, he didn't even seem to hear him. Dan dropped the slate which he'd been clutching still and ran like a hare across the field, over the wall, and across the moor to the woods. "Kathy! Tessa!" he shouted, sending the crows up in alarm from their branches. He saw no sign of the two girls. He ran as far as the trap, but they'd long since gone from there. Just as wildly he ran back to the pen and edged himself as close as he dared to the fevered Clem. "Shall I fetch thee water?" he whispered. Clem gasped something that could have been yes, and half opened his eyes. Dan picked up the bowl and ran to the trickle stream, hastily scooped up water and ran back to the pen. "Here, Clem." He stood watching the shepherd doubtfully. The man's skin gleamed with sweat. Dan edged the bowl to him, but Clem didn't even see it. "I don't want thee to be ill, Clem. Please don't. Please don't do that." It seemed to Dan the longest moment of his life, till he decided what he must do. He crept into the pen and sat down in the straw beside Clem. Then he took the bowl up, raised Clem's head into his lap, and moistened his dry lips with water. "Ah!" "Oh no, this is making me nervous. Let's read on and find out what happens next." Tessa and Catherine had come down to the edge of the wood. From here they could see the river, brown and swollen with thaw. They could hear the rush of it as it swept across the stepping stones. Catherine grasped Tessa's arms. "I can see smoke! Look! Lots of it!" They craned forward, trying to see beyond Hogg's farm and the trees beyond that to the chimneys of the lower village. The smoke seemed to gust, much greater in volume than chimney smoke, yet it was impossible to tell where it was coming from. And from far away, it seemed, came the high babble of voices. "What's happening?" asked Tessa. "Should we go on down just to the river to see what it is?" "I don't know. I don't think we would see more than we can see from up here." "But please!" Tessa started to run down ahead of her. "Before it rains!" The sky was growing heavier now, and there was that still kind of echo in the air that comes just before a heavy rain. And just as they came to the edge of the river, the first bloated drops began to fall. Clem was calmer now, and seemed to be drifting off into his sleep. Dan settled him down into the straw and crawled out of the pen to fill up his bowl with fresh water. The rain soaked him before he reached the trickle stream. "I needn't have brought it this far," he told himself. "Next time I'll just shove it outside the pen and the rain will fill it up." By the time he reached the pen again, his shirt was drenched. Clem was awake, staring at him with unseeing eyes. "I'm as wet as a fish, Clem," said Dan, "but that's hotter than fire. Poor Clem." He stripped off his wet shirt and rolled it up and then used it to wipe the sweat away from Clem's forehead and neck. He could see how comforting the cool cloth was to the man. Clem drifted back into sleep for just a few minutes, and then he woke up again and his eyes were clear. He looked up at the boy for a long time, taking in where he was and what he was doing there with him. "God bless thee for this," he whispered. "Art thou better?" Clem closed his eyes as if to sleep again. "Much better. But I must ask thee to go, Dan, now, and never, never come in here to me again." Dan stared at him. The chill in Clem's voice made the hairs on the back of his neck creep. Why wouldn't Clem look at him again? He shivered violently. Cold and fright and a sudden release of tension after nursing Clem through his fever taking a hold of him together. He crawled out to the mouth of the pen and, without even a backward glance at Clem, flung himself out into the lashes of rain and dashed round to the front of the barn. He was shaking in convulsions, colder than he'd ever been before. His old shirt was hanging over the beam at the back of the barn. He rubbed himself down with it, put it on as damp as it was, and crawled like a sick cat into his sack in the straw. He buried himself down inside it for warmth, stuck his thumb in his mouth, and at last fell asleep. I have a lot of worry there. A lot of worry there for Dan. Goodness me, what might happen next? We've only got 2 chapters left. Over to you, Miss Fletcher.